What happens when a music legend sits down for what should be a light-hearted conversation, only to find himself ambushed by a host determined to make him look foolish in front of millions? In just 35 seconds, a simple question about his recent successful tour would spiral into one of the most uncomfortable and shocking moments in daytime television history, exposing a host who seemed more interested in creating conflict than conducting an interview. This is the story of how Rod Stewart walked onto the Loose Women set, expecting professional journalism, and instead found himself defending his dignity against a relentless barrage of personal attacks that left viewers stunned and the panel divided. The studio lights were bright and welcoming as Rod Stewart walked onto the Loose Women set that afternoon. The audience clapped warmly and enthusiastically, their excitement genuine as one of rock music's most iconic voices took his seat opposite the panel. He wore a confident smile, relaxed and ready to chat about his latest album and exciting upcoming performances. Denise Welch sat at the center of the panel, flanked by Ruth Langsford and Colin Nolan, while Janet Street Porter occupied the far seat. The makeup artists had done their final touches minutes before. The autocue was ready. Everything seemed perfectly normal for another afternoon of celebrity chat and panel banter. The opening pleasantries flowed smoothly and warmly. Ruth welcomed Rod with genuine warmth and enthusiasm, commenting positively on his recent success and wonderful career. "Rod, it's such a pleasure to have you here. Your latest tour has been a massive hit, sold out shows everywhere. How does it feel to still be packing arenas after all these years?" The audience responded enthusiastically and loudly, creating an atmosphere that felt comfortable, welcoming, and inviting. Rod settled into his chair comfortably, crossing one leg over the other, his famous raspy voice filling the studio as he thanked them graciously for having him. "Thanks, Ruth. It's brilliant, really. The fans are amazing. They keep me going." He talked about the weather, made a joke about the traffic getting to the studio, the kind of easy conversation that usually fills the first minutes of any interview. The panel laughed, the audience laughed, everything felt right and natural. Then Denise leaned forward purposefully, her expression changing subtly but noticeably. The warmth that had characterized Ruth's introduction seemed to evaporate completely as she prepared her first question. There was something in her eyes, a sharpness that hadn't been there during the preliminaries. The other panelists seemed to sense it, too, their smiles faltering slightly as they watched their colleague shift into what could only be described as attack mode. "Rod, let's talk about your tour," Denise began, her tone carrying a sharp edge that immediately felt different from the friendly welcome just moments before. "You're charging quite a lot for tickets, aren't you? Some people might say you're taking advantage of loyal fans who have supported you faithfully for decades, fans who have bought every album, come to every show they could afford, and now they're being priced out of seeing you live. How do you justify that to them?" The shift in atmosphere was immediate. Rod's smile faltered, clearly surprised. He sat up straighter, his hands gripping the chair arms. "Well, I wouldn't put it quite that way," Rod responded carefully. "The cost of putting on a show these days, the production, the band, the venues, it all adds up. We try to make it worth every single penny for the fans, and honestly, we have different price tiers to make it accessible where possible." He paused, glancing around the panel, hoping to steer back to lighter territory, but Denise wasn't finished. She leaned back, a smirk crossing her face. "But you're worth millions, Rod. Don't you think at some point you have enough? Do you really need to squeeze more money out of ordinary people who are struggling with their bills? I mean, inflation is hitting everyone hard these days. Groceries, rent, everything. Yet here you are adding to their burdens." Ruth shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes darting between Denise and Rod. Colin glanced sideways at Denise, uncertain, while Janet adjusted her glasses, looking mildly perplexed. The audience had gone quiet, the initial buzz fading into an awkward hush. Rod's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. "I've worked for 50 years in this industry. I've earned what I have through hard work. The ticket prices reflect the quality of the show. Nobody is forced to come, but they do come, don't they? And they leave with memories that'll last a lifetime." He tried to inject some humor, adding, "Besides, I've got to pay for all those football jerseys somehow." A few chuckles rippled through the audience, but Denise interrupted sharply. "They come because they love you, and you know that. You're exploiting that love. You're exploiting their loyalty." The word exploiting hung in the air like a challenge. Rod's expression hardened. His hands gripped the chair arms tighter. He had expected a conversation, perhaps some banter. This felt like an ambush. "I don't exploit anyone," Rod said firmly. "That's a very strong accusation, Denise. I give my fans an incredible show. They leave happy. That's not exploitation. If anything, it's a fair exchange. My energy and music for their support." Ruth tried to intervene, her voice tentative. "I think what Denise is trying to say is that times are tough, and perhaps—" But Denise cut across her colleague. "I know exactly what I'm saying, Ruth." She turned back to Rod. "Let's talk about your personal life. You've been married 3 times. 3 times, Rod. Some might say you don't have the best track record with commitment. How does that square with the romantic ballads you sing about forever love?" The audience gasped audibly, a collective intake of breath that echoed through the studio. Colin's mouth fell open in surprise, and Janet looked down at her notes, uncomfortable, her pen tapping nervously. This had crossed a line, veering from professional critique into deeply personal territory. Rod's face flushed, a mix of anger and disbelief. "That's my private life. That has nothing to do with why I'm here today. I'm here to talk about my music, my tour, not ancient history." But Denise pressed on, feeding off his distress, her voice rising slightly. "Oh, but it does matter, doesn't it? You present yourself as this lovable rogue, this charming entertainer. But really, aren't you just someone who takes what he wants and moves on when bored? With relationships, with money, with everything. Fans idolize you, but is that image real, or is it just a facade?" "Denise, that's enough," Ruth said firmly, her voice carrying real authority now, cutting through the tension like a knife. She leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly. "Rod is our guest, and this isn't appropriate. This isn't what we do. Let's get back to the album. Rod, tell us about the inspiration behind the new tracks." Rod interjected, holding up a hand to stop her, his composure cracking but not breaking. "No, Ruth, it's fine. Let her finish. Let Denise say whatever it is she's clearly been dying to say since I walked out here. Since before I walked out here, probably. This seems rehearsed, planned. So, let's hear all of it. What else do you want to accuse me of, Denise? What other crimes have I committed? Am I a bad singer now, too? Or perhaps you don't like my hair?" Denise smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was the smile of someone who thinks they're winning, who believes they're landing their blows. "I'm just asking the questions that people at home are thinking, the questions that your adoring fans might be too polite to ask. Someone needs to hold celebrities accountable. Someone needs to ask the difficult questions instead of just fawning over you because you're famous. For example, you've had hits for decades, but some critics say your recent work is just rehashing the old stuff. Are you out of fresh ideas, Rod, relying on nostalgia to fill seats?" Colin spoke up suddenly, her Liverpool accent strong with emotion, her voice shaking slightly but determined. "No, Denise, you're not. You're not asking questions people are thinking. You're being rude. You're being deliberately cruel. Rod came here as a guest in good faith, and you're treating him like he's done something terrible when all he's done is have a successful career and yes, a complicated personal life like a lot of people do, like many of us have had. There's a difference between asking tough questions and being outright nasty. Let's talk about the positives. Rod, what's your favorite memory from the tour so far?" Denise turned on Colin with surprising speed, her head snapping around. "Oh, so now you're defending him just because he's famous and charming. That's exactly the problem. That's exactly what I'm talking about. People like Rod get away with everything because of who they are, because of their celebrity status. Nobody holds them accountable. Everyone just smiles and nods and lets them do whatever they want. Like how you've dodged questions about your tax arrangements in the past, living abroad to save on bills while fans here pay full price. Get away with what exactly?" Rod's voice cut through the rising tension like a blade, his Scottish lilt sharpening with frustration. "What have I gotten away with, Denise? Spell it out for everyone. What crime have I committed? I've paid my taxes every year, every penny. I've got the receipts to prove it. I've supported numerous charities, given money and time to causes I believe in, like children's hospitals and music education. Programs. I've raised 8 children, been present in their lives as much as this crazy job allows. I've worked constantly, given people joy through my music for 5 decades. 5 decades of entertaining people, making them happy, helping them through tough times with songs they love. What crime have I committed that deserves this interrogation, this trial by television? And as for my music, if fans want the classics, I give them the classics. Mixed with new stuff, that's what they pay for. The audience began to murmur, voices of support for Rod rippling through the crowd like wind through leaves. Someone even called out in agreement, a woman's voice saying, "Leave him alone." Another person clapped. Then another, building into scattered applause. Denise's expression tightened, her jaw setting, realizing perhaps for the first time that her attack wasn't landing the way she had planned. The audience wasn't with her. They were with Rod. "You're being defensive," Denise shot back, her voice taking on a note of desperation. "If you can't handle a few tough questions, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. Maybe you should just stay in your mansion and count your money if you're so sensitive to criticism. If you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen, as they say. And while we're at it, your fashion choices, those flashy suits, is that compensation for something?" "Tough questions," Rod repeated, his tone laced with sarcasm as he stood up, his patience finally exhausted, his movement sudden enough to make everyone jump slightly. "These aren't tough questions, Denise. Tough questions are fair, balanced, and relevant to the topic at hand. Tough questions challenge ideas, probe deeper into subjects, seek truth. Like asking about the evolution of rock music or how I collaborate with younger artists. What you're doing is attacking me personally for no reason other than what? To make yourself look brave, to prove you can take down a celebrity, to show everyone how edgy and fearless you are. Is that what this is about? Your ego? Or is there something else driving this? Some personal grudge I don't know about?" Janet Street. Porter finally found her voice, clearing her throat loudly. "I have to say, and I don't say this lightly, I think Rod has a point here. This feels less like an interview and more like a trial, and I'm not entirely sure what the charges are supposed to be. I've been in this business a long time, newspapers, TV, the lot, and this doesn't feel like journalism. It feels personal, almost vindictive. Rod, ignore that. Tell us about your collaboration with that new band on the album. Sounds fascinating." Denise's face reddened, her neck blotching with color. "So, all of you are against me now. Fine, that's just fine. Rod, since you're standing there acting so perfect, so above it all, let me ask you this. How many of those 8 children actually speak to you regularly? How many of them would say you were a present father? How many of them grew up with you actually being there? Or were you too busy touring and making money and chasing the next Mrs. Stewart? How many birthdays did you miss? How many school plays? How many parent-teacher meetings? And don't get me started on your well-publicized affairs. Does that fit the family man image?" The studio went completely silent. Even the crew behind the cameras stopped moving, frozen in shock. The boom operator stood motionless. The camera operators held their positions without adjusting. What had started as an uncomfortable interview had descended over the course of these 16 minutes into something cruel and deeply personal. Something that went beyond acceptable television into territory that felt almost sadistic. Rod's face had gone pale, his eyes bright with anger and hurt, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. He took a deep breath, composing himself. "That," Rod said quietly, his voice shaking slightly with emotion, "is beyond the pale. That is absolutely beyond the pale. You don't know anything about my relationship with my children. You don't know anything about my life beyond what you've read in tabloids and gossip magazines. You certainly don't have the right to stand in judgment of me as a father. Nobody does. My children know who I am. They know I love them. I've been there for the big moments, the small ones when I could. The touring life is hard, but we've made it work. Using them as weapons against me is disgusting, and my past mistakes, I've owned them, learned from them. That's more than some can say." Ruth stood up quickly, her chair scraping against the floor, moving toward Rod with her hands extended in a placating gesture. "Rod, I am so sorry. This isn't how we conduct interviews here. This isn't what we stand for. This isn't the show we run. I promise you. Let's reset. Talk about your philanthropy. You've done so much for charity." But Rod, reaching up to remove the microphone from his lapel with deliberate movements, shook his head. "Actually, it appears this is exactly how you conduct interviews. At least when Denise is sitting in that chair. I came here in good faith. I came here to promote my album, to talk about music, about my tour, about bringing joy to people through performance. Instead, over these last 16 minutes, I've been insulted, accused of exploitation, and had my personal life dragged through the mud for entertainment. My marriages, my children, my finances, even my style, all of it thrown at me like ammunition. Denise crossed her arms defensively, her body language rigid. Oh, here we go, here it comes. The big star is going to storm off because someone dared to challenge him, because someone didn't just sit here and worship at the altar of Rod Stewart. Poor Rod can't handle a real interview. Maybe next time, prepare for more than fluff. Rod turned back to face her, his voice rising now, losing some of that careful control. You haven't challenged me, Denise. You've attacked me. There's a fundamental difference. A challenge would be asking me about the themes in my new album, about how my songwriting has evolved over 50 years, about the state of the music industry, about what it takes to stay relevant in a streaming world. What you've done is launch a personal vendetta disguised as journalism. This isn't brave. This isn't holding me accountable. This is bullying, and frankly, it's embarrassing for you, for the show. Colin stood up as well, her voice passionate, her hands gesturing emphatically. He's absolutely right. Denise, you've been out of order from the moment he sat down. You clearly had an agenda coming into this, and it wasn't about having a conversation or conducting an interview. It was about tearing him down, about making yourself look big by making him look small, and it's not working. Everyone can see what you're doing. Rod, please stay. Let's talk about your family in a positive way, like how you've blended them all together. I don't have to listen to this. Denise snapped, her voice brittle. From either of you, I asked legitimate questions about a public figure who sells himself to the public, who makes millions from public appearances. If he can't handle scrutiny, that's his problem, not mine. Maybe he should think about that before he agrees to come on chat shows, and let's not forget your environmental impacts, private jets for tours while preaching about charity. Janet shook her head slowly, deliberately. There's scrutiny, and then there's what just happened here. I've been in journalism for 40 years. Worked in newspapers, radio, television. I know the difference between holding someone accountable and personal attacks. This wasn't scrutiny, Denise. This was something else entirely. It dragged on for far too long, turning a potential discussion into a spectacle. The audience began to applaud slowly at first, then building into sustained clapping that filled the studio. They were applauding Rod, supporting him against what they had just witnessed over those intense 16 minutes. Some were even standing, getting to their feet in solidarity. The cameras captured it all, panning across the audience, showing their faces, their expressions of support and disapproval. The division on the panel was stark. The audience's clear allegiance was unmistakable, and Rod Stewart stood center stage, his dignity intact despite the sustained assault on his character. Rod looked out at the audience, his expression softening slightly as he saw their support. He nodded to them, acknowledging their kindness, their understanding. Then he turned back to the panel one last time, his gaze sweeping across all four women. Ruth, Colin, Janet, thank you for trying to maintain some professionalism here. I appreciate it truly. I see that you tried to stop this, that you were uncomfortable. That means something. You've all been gracious in your own ways. He paused, his eyes finding Denise, holding her gaze. As for you, I hope whatever point you were trying to make was worth it. I hope humiliating a guest on national television makes you feel powerful or relevant or whatever it is you were looking for today. I hope it was worth damaging this show's reputation, and perhaps your own. Denise's face was set in hard lines, her mouth a thin slash. You're being dramatic, overly dramatic. You're playing the victim because you didn't get the softball interview you expected, because someone actually asked you real questions instead of just fawning over you. That's all this is. This 16-minute exchange will blow over and you'll be laughing about it. No, Ruth interrupted firmly, her voice carrying real anger now, something rarely seen from the normally composed presenter. Denise, stop. Just stop talking. Rod is right. You crossed every line today, every single professional boundary. This isn't what we do. This isn't who we are as a show. We've had tough discussions before, but this was relentless and unfair. Rod placed the microphone carefully on his chair and straightened his jacket, smoothing down the lapels. I've been in this business long enough to know when I'm not welcome. I've faced hostile crowds in my early days, tough critics who didn't like my music, difficult moments when everything seemed to be going wrong. but I've never, in 50 years, had someone invite me somewhere specifically to tear me apart for their own entertainment over an extended segment like this. That's a new low, that's something special. He began walking toward the exit, his stride purposeful, his back straight. The audience applauded louder, many now on their feet, some whistling their support. Colin called after him, her voice catching with emotion. "Rod, we're so sorry. Please know this isn't typical. Please know we didn't want this. This isn't us." He turned back one final time, offering Colin a sad smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I know, love, I know you're a good person. I've watched you on this show. You've always been fair." His eyes swept over the panel again. But the fact is, she was allowed to do it. She was allowed to sit there and attack me for 16 full minutes. And that says something about this show, doesn't it? That says something about the culture here. Denise leaned back in her chair, her arms still crossed tightly. "Oh, please, drama, drama, drama. You'll be fine. This will probably sell more tickets for your overpriced tour. You'll probably thank me later. This is probably the best publicity you've had in years." The audience actually booed. Actual boos rang out in the studio, loud and sustained, directed at one of the show's own hosts. It was unprecedented, shocking even to the crew who had worked on hundreds of episodes. Janet covered her face with her hands, mortified. Ruth looked at Denise with something close to disbelief, her mouth slightly open. Colin was shaking her head slowly, her disappointment and embarrassment visible on her face. Rod paused at the edge of the stage, the exit just steps away. The cameras captured his profile, the way the studio lights caught the silver in his famous hair, the tightness around his eyes, the set of his jaw. He looked like a man who had been pushed too far, who had maintained his composure in the face of unprovoked hostility, who had chosen dignity over retaliation even when provoked beyond reasonable limits. "You know what the real shame is," Rod said, his voice carrying across the silent studio with that famous rasp. "I actually enjoy this show usually. I've watched it at home. I've laughed with you lot. I thought this would be fun. A bit of banter, some laughs, maybe a silly story or two about my Celtic football obsession or my model trains. But you, Denise, you turned it into something ugly over these 16 minutes. You made it personal and mean. And for what? What did you actually gain from this? What was the point? Did you think this would go viral in a good way for you?" Denise didn't answer. For the first time since the interview began, she seemed at a loss for words, her mouth opening and closing without sound. The confidence that had fueled her attacks had cracked, revealing something underneath that looked uncomfortably like uncertainty, like someone who had just realized they had miscalculated badly. "I'll tell you what you gained," Rod continued, his voice softer now, but somehow more powerful. "You gained nothing positive. You didn't expose some hidden truth about me. You didn't reveal some scandal. You didn't uncover anything important. All you did was show everyone watching that sometimes bullies can sit behind a desk and call it journalism, that cruelty can masquerade as tough questioning. That's all you accomplished today." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth and sadness. The audience erupted again, this time with cheers mixed in with the applause. People were shouting support, calling out agreement with what Rod had said. The atmosphere in the studio had completely transformed from what it had been when the interview started. What should have been Denise's moment of triumph, her tough interrogation of a celebrity, her fearless journalism, had become her moment of exposure. The audience had turned against her completely. The panel had distanced themselves from her actions, and the guest she had tried to humiliate was walking away with his head held high and his reputation enhanced. Ruth stood up from her seat, moving toward Rod quickly. "Please, Rod, on behalf of the show, on behalf of all of us, I apologize from the bottom of my heart. This should never have happened. This is not who we are. This is not what we represent. I am so sorry. Perhaps we can salvage this talk about your upcoming plans." Rod looked at her, his expression softening with genuine appreciation. "I appreciate that, Ruth. I really do. I can see you mean it. But the problem is it did happen, and it happened because someone thought it was acceptable. Someone thought they could treat a guest this way and get away with it, and maybe they will. Maybe nothing will change, but at least people saw it. At least it's out there now, after these 16 minutes of chaos." He glanced back at Denise one more time. She was staring at her hands now, her face flushed, her neck blotchy. The rest of the panel had physically turned away from her, their body language speaking volumes. Colin had actually moved her chair slightly further away. Janet was looking anywhere but at her colleague. Colin had tears in her eyes. "You deserve better than this, Rod. You deserve so much better. I'm ashamed this happened on our show." "Yeah, well," Rod managed a small smile. "Can't win them all, can you? But the fans who come to my shows, the people who have supported me all these years, they know who I am. They know what I stand for, and that's what matters, not this circus." Janet nodded slowly. "You're absolutely right, and I'm embarrassed this happened on our watch. We've had legends like you before, and it's always been respectful." The studio was still buzzing with tension as Rod finally walked off the set for real this time. The cameras followed him until he disappeared through the studio door. The audience still on their feet, still applauding, some wiping their own tears. Behind him on the panel, 3 women sat in uncomfortable silence while one, Denise Welch, finally looked up to find herself completely isolated. The colleague beside her had shifted her chair away. The audience was openly hostile. The cameras had captured every moment of her aggressive questioning, every personal attack, every instance where she had chosen cruelty over professionalism, vindictiveness over journalism, all unfolding over those unforgettable 16 minutes. Ruth tried to salvage what was left of the show, her voice tight with emotion. "We need to take a break," she said into the camera, her professional mask barely holding. "We'll be right back after these messages." But as the cameras cut away and the red lights dimmed, everyone in that studio knew something significant had just happened. This wasn't just an awkward interview that would be forgotten by tomorrow. This was a moment that would define how guests were treated, how hosts conducted themselves. Rod Stewart had walked onto that set expecting professional treatment. He had maintained his dignity throughout the 16-minute ordeal, and he had walked away having shown everyone watching exactly who the real problem was in that studio.